On a cold and rainy night, a 3-year-old homeless girl takes shelter under the awning of an abandoned store when she spots a blonde 2-year-old boy sitting on the curb, shivering violently in expensive but inadequate clothes. Without hesitation, she takes off her worn-out coat, her only protection against the world, and drapes it over the unknown boy's shoulders. At that very moment, a well-dressed man comes running and shouts the child's name. When he sees his son warmed by the girl's coat, he does something unbelievable. The rain fell like icy tears on the city pavement, creating small rivers that snaked through the dark gutters. The metallic sound of drops hitting the abandoned storefront awning echoed like a sad song in the cold October dawn. There, huddled against the damp wall of an old department store that had closed months ago, Luna watched the world through large, alert eyes that seemed to hold too many secrets for a child of only 3. Her threadbare coat, patched with scraps of fabric she had found in the streets, was her only protection against the cold that cut like a razor. The sleeves, much too long, covered her small hands, and she used them to hug herself, trying to maintain the little warmth her thin body could produce. Her brown hair, disheveled by the dampness, stuck to her face as she bit her lips to keep them from trembling. Luna knew every shadow, every sound, every danger of those streets. She had learned from a very young age that trusting adults was like playing with fire. It always ended in pain. But there was something in her nature that resisted the complete hardening of her heart. Even after all the disappointments, betrayals, and abandonments, a small but persistent flame still burned in her chest, a pure goodness that not even the worst experiences had managed to extinguish. The wind blew harder, bringing with it the familiar smell of rain mixed with the odor of wet asphalt and accumulated garbage. Luna pulled the coat tighter around her body, her fingers automatically finding the small hole in the pocket where she used to keep the breadcrumbs she sometimes managed to get. Today, like so many other days, the pocket was empty. It was then that she saw him, across the street, sitting on the curb as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Was a boy who couldn't have been more than 2 years old. His blonde hair shone even under the dim light of the street lamps, and his clothes, a navy blue outfit that Luna recognized as expensive, were completely soaked. But what caught her attention the most was the violent trembling that shook the child's small body. The boy looked up at the sky with a confused expression, as if he didn't understand why the water was falling on him. His lips had a bluish tint that Luna knew well. It was the same shade her own lips took on when she stayed too long in the cold. But there was something different about this boy. He didn't show the instinctive fear that she had developed. On the contrary, he seemed lost, as if he had fallen there from the sky. Luna felt something stir in her chest, a warm sensation that contrasted with the cold that dominated her body. She knew that feeling, although she tried to ignore it whenever it appeared. It was the same force that made her share her food with the stray cats, that prevented her from taking things that weren't hers, even when she was hungry, that made her help other homeless people when they were hurt or sick. She looked at her coat, feeling the weight of the decision forming in her mind. It was her only protection, her only possession of real value. Without it, she would be at the mercy of the night's relentless cold. But the boy across the street was trembling in a way that scared her, and his lips were getting bluer and bluer. For a moment, Luna hesitated. All the bitter lessons that life had taught her screamed for her to stay where she was, to protect herself first. But when she looked again at the boy and saw a tear running down his wet face, all the voices of self-preservation fell silent. Without thinking twice, Luna took off her coat. The rough fabric of the coat slid down Luna's arms like a second skin being torn off. The immediate cold hit her like a punch, making her gasp as the icy wind penetrated her thin blouse. But she didn't hesitate. With quick and silent steps, a skill she had perfected during years living in the shadows, she crossed the empty street, avoiding the puddles that reflected the streetlights like small broken mirrors. The boy looked up when she approached, and Luna was surprised to see that his eyes were a clear, crystalline blue, like the sky on days she could barely remember. There was no fear in that gaze, only a childish curiosity mixed with confusion. That intrigued her. Most of the children she met on the streets carried the same distrust that she had learned to cultivate. "You're cold," Luna said softly, her voice almost swallowed by the sound of the rain. It wasn't a question, but a simple observation. She extended the coat towards the boy, who watched her with complete attention, as if she were the most interesting thing he had ever seen. The boy didn't move initially, just continued to watch her with those immense eyes. Luna knelt on the wet sidewalk, feeling the cold water seep through the thin fabric of her pants, and gently placed the coat over the boy's small shoulders. The fabric, too big for him, enveloped him like a protective hug. "Better now," she murmured, adjusting the coat to better cover the child's trembling body. Her fingers worked quickly, zipping it up to his neck and pulling the hood over his wet blonde hair. The boy's trembling began to subside almost immediately, and a small sigh of relief escaped his still bluish lips. For a moment, they looked at each other in silence. Luna felt something strange happen in her chest, a warm sensation that spread despite the cold that now dominated her completely. It had been a long time since she had seen genuine gratitude in someone's eyes. The boy extended a small hand and gently touched Luna's face, as if he wanted to be sure she was real. "Thank you," he said in a sweet, clear voice, the word coming out a little garbled by his age, but perfectly understandable. Luna blinked, surprised. It was rare to find a child so young who already spoke so clearly, and even rarer to hear a sincere thank you. She was about to answer when she heard quick footsteps approaching. Instinct made her stand up immediately, all her muscles tensing for a possible escape. She had learned that when adults appeared running towards her, it usually wasn't for a good reason. Her eyes quickly scanned the surroundings, identifying the nearest escape routes. "Ethan! Ethan!" The male voice cut through the night like a blade, filled with panic and despair. A tall man emerged from the darkness, running towards them with a speed that made Luna take a step back. He wore a dark, expensive suit, even wet from the rain, and there was something in his posture that screamed authority and power. The boy, Ethan, looked in the direction of the voice, and his eyes lit up with recognition and joy. "Daddy!" he shouted, trying to get up awkwardly with the large coat hindering his movements. Luna felt the blood run cold in her veins. Dad. Of course, he had a dad. A dad who obviously had money, who wore expensive clothes, who probably lived in a big warm house where there was never a shortage of food. And now this man would see her there with his son and would think, what exactly would he think? The man reached them in seconds, falling to his knees beside Ethan and enveloping him in a desperate hug. "Oh my God, Ethan, I was so worried. How did you get out of the house? Where were you?" His words came out jumbled as he checked if the boy was hurt. It was then that his eyes met Luna's. The silence that settled between Luna and the man seemed to last an eternity, although it was only a few seconds. Richard Sterling, one of the city's most influential businessmen, felt something churn in his stomach when his eyes met the girl's. She was so small, so thin, that for a moment he thought she was an apparition created by his despair. But she was real, and she was there, trembling violently in the rain, wearing only a thin blouse that clung to her tiny body. Richard looked at Ethan, who was now warm and protected inside a coat that clearly didn't belong to him. A worn, patched coat, but one that had saved his son from the deadly cold of the night. His eyes returned to Luna, and this time he really saw her. The wet hair plastered to her pale face, the lips blue with cold. The arms crossed over her chest in a futile attempt to warm herself. "You gave him your coat," Richard said, his voice coming out more hoarse than he intended. It wasn't a question, but a statement filled with disbelief. In his world, people did favors expecting something in return. No one simply gave their most valuable possessions to strangers. Luna didn't answer. Her muscles were tense, ready to run. There was something in the man's expression that she couldn't decipher. It wasn't anger or threat. It was something she had no words to describe. But her experience told her not to trust expressions she didn't understand. "Daddy, she helped me," Ethan said, his voice muffled against his father's chest. "I was very cold, and she gave me her coat. It's very nice." Richard felt his throat tighten. Ethan, at only 2 years old, already demonstrated more compassion and gratitude than many adults in his social circle. And this girl, this child who obviously had nothing, had given her only protection to his son without thinking twice. "What's your name?" Richard asked gently, trying to make his voice sound less imposing. He stood up slowly, taking care not to make sudden movements that could scare her even more. Luna took a step back, her eyes never leaving the man's face. She had learned that when adults started asking questions, bad things usually happen next. Social workers, police officers, people who promised to help but always ended up making everything worse. "You don't have to be afraid," Richard continued, noticing her hesitation. "I just want to thank you for what you did for my son. You saved his life." The word "saved" echoed in Luna's mind. She hadn't thought of it that way. For her, it had just been the right thing to do. Seeing someone cold, you gave them warmth. Seeing someone hungry, you shared your food. They were simple rules that she followed instinctively, even when it meant suffering the consequences. Richard took off his suit jacket and bent down slowly, extending it towards Luna. "Please, take this. You're freezing." Luna's response was immediate and categorical. She shook her head vigorously and took a few more steps back. "No," she said, her voice small but firm. "I don't want anything." The refusal hit Richard like a punch. In his world, money solved everything. People did anything for a financial reward, but this tiny girl was rejecting his help, trembling with cold, but keeping her dignity intact. "At least let me take you somewhere warm," he insisted. "You could get sick in this rain." "No," Luna repeated, and this time there was real fear in her voice. Warm place meant adults' house. Adults' house meant questions, broken promises, and, inevitably, abandonment. "I have to go." Richard saw the panic grow in her eyes and felt his heart break. Ethan, noticing the tension, extended his small hands towards Luna. "Don't go away," he said, with the devastating simplicity of childhood. "Stay with us?" For a moment, Luna hesitated. There was something in Ethan's pure innocence that touched the deepest part of her soul. But when she looked again at Richard, she saw the complexity of the adult world that she feared so much. Without a word, Luna turned and ran. Richard remained standing in the rain for several minutes after Luna disappeared into the darkness, holding Ethan against his chest as he processed what had just happened. The image of the girl running barefoot across the wet pavement repeated in his mind like a movie he couldn't pause. Her small feet splashing in the puddles, her thin body trembling under the soaking blouse, her eyes full of fear when he tried to help her. "Daddy, why did she go away?" Ethan asked, his voice muffled against his father's shoulder. "Didn't she like us?" The innocent question cut Richard like a razor. How to explain to a 2-year-old that not all adults were trustworthy? How to say that some people had been hurt so many times that running away had become their only form of protection? "It's not that." "Ethan," Richard replied softly, kissing the top of the boy's blonde head. "She's just scared. Some people need time to trust." As he walked back to the car, a black Mercedes that was parked 2 blocks away, with the driver desperately searching for them, Richard couldn't get Luna out of his thoughts. How had such a small child ended up alone on the streets? Where were her parents? How did she survive? More importantly, why wouldn't the image of those large, haunted eyes leave him alone? In the days that followed, Richard found that concentrating on work had become an impossible task. During important meetings, his mind wandered to the street girl. While signing million-dollar contracts, he wondered if she had found shelter from the rain. When he was in his heated mansion, eating elaborate dinners, he thought about whether she had eaten anything that day. Ethan, still wearing Luna's worn coat, constantly asked about her. "When are we going to see the girl again, Daddy?" was his favorite question, asked with the persistence typical of a child who didn't understand why some questions didn't have simple answers. On the fourth day after the encounter, Richard made a decision that would change everything. Sitting in his office on the 30th floor of a commercial building with a panoramic view of the city, he picked up the phone and called Jack Stratton, the best private investigator he knew. "Jack, I need you to find someone for me," Richard said without preamble when the man answered. "Of course, Mr. Sterling. Full name, documents, last known information." Richard hesitated. "It's a child, a girl approximately 3 years old, lives on the streets of downtown." The silence on the other end of the line lasted a few seconds. "Sir, you're going to have to give me more information. Hair, height, specific characteristics." "Brown hair, big, dark eyes, very thin. Was in the Flower District area on Tuesday night last week, during the rain." Richard realized how vague and insufficient his information was, but it was all he had. "I understand. I'll start the investigation, but I must warn you that finding street children can be complicated. They move constantly, avoid authorities, and often have no official records." Official records. Richard had never thought of that. In his world, everyone had documents, certificates, numbers that connected them to the system. But Luna existed outside of all that, invisible to the eyes of formal society. 3 days later, Jack called with a report that left Richard deeply disturbed. "Mr. Sterling, I got some information about street children in the area you mentioned. I spoke with local residents, shopkeepers, some social workers. There's a small group of minors who frequent that area, but they're extremely distrustful and rarely stay in the same place for long." "And the girl, does anyone know her?" "Some people mentioned a little girl who matches the description you gave. They say she's different from the others, more reserved, more careful. Apparently, she helps other homeless people when she can, but never accepts help for herself." Richard felt something tighten in his chest. "Where is she now?" "That's the hard part, sir. No one knows. After that rainy night, she simply disappeared. It's as if she dissolved into the shadows of the city." That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He stood at the window of his room, looking at the city lights below, knowing that somewhere in that maze of concrete and glass, a child who had saved his son's life was struggling alone to survive another night. The first week turned into 2, and Richard found himself doing something he never imagined, personally driving through the streets of downtown every night, looking for a girl who seemed to have become a ghost. Ethan accompanied him sometimes, pressed against the car window, Luna's coat carefully folded in his lap like a talisman. "Is she hiding from us, Daddy?" Ethan asked on one of those nights, his small voice filled with confusion and sadness. Richard didn't know how to answer, how to explain to his son that some people hid not out of malice, but out of survival, that the world had taught Luna that trusting was too dangerous. It was during one of those nightly searches that Richard began to see his city with completely different eyes. He had spent 42 years living in a bubble of privilege, driving along the main avenues, frequenting the best neighborhoods. Now, navigating the narrow, poorly lit streets of downtown, he discovered a parallel reality that had always existed there, but that he had never bothered to see. There were more people living on the streets than he ever imagined. Entire families sheltered under awnings, children playing with toys made of trash, elderly people sleeping on damp cardboard. And in the midst of all that misery, he was looking for a little girl who had chosen to be cold so that his son wouldn't be. Jack called regularly with small fragments of information. A shopkeeper had seen a small girl rummaging through trash cans behind a bakery. A lady who sold flowers on the corner mentioned a child who sometimes appeared with injured cats, asking for free veterinary help. A priest at a nearby church spoke about a little girl who left flowers on the abandoned graves in the municipal cemetery. All the reports painted the same portrait: a lonely but generous child who cared for others, even though she had no one to care for her. Each story made Richard's chest tighten more, increasing his determination to find her. Richard's wife, Olivia, began to show increasing irritation with his obsession, as she called it. "Richard, this is getting ridiculous," she said during a tense dinner, her cutting voice echoing through the luxurious dining room. "You're spending time and money looking for a street girl. We have our own family to take care of." "She saved our son," Richard replied firmly, cutting the steak that had suddenly lost all its flavor. "If it weren't for her, Ethan could have what? Caught a cold. Richard, you're dramatizing." Ethan left the house out of childish curiosity, was in the rain for a few minutes, and came home safe and sound. End of story. But it wasn't the end of the story for Richard. He had seen the bluish color of Ethan's lips. He had felt how the boy's body was trembling violently. If Luna hadn't appeared at that moment, if she hadn't made that gesture of pure altruism, the consequences could have been devastating. "Olivia, a 3-year-old gave her only protection to our son. That's not something you forget or ignore." "That's exactly why you should stop this insane search," Olivia retorted, her eyes flashing with barely suppressed irritation. "Children like that are part of a world that isn't ours. We have responsibilities to our own social class, our own obligations." The coldness in Olivia's words hit Richard like a slap in the face. When had he become so distant from basic humanity? When had their wealth turned into a barrier that prevented him from seeing the suffering of others? That same night, when Olivia was already asleep, Richard received a call from Jack that made his heart race. "Mr. Sterling, I found her." "Where?" Richard was already getting up, searching for his car keys. "City General Hospital. She was admitted this afternoon with a high fever and dehydration. She's in the pediatric ward." Richard felt the world spin around him. Luna was sick, hospitalized, probably scared and alone. While he slept in his comfortable bed, she was fighting a fever in a hospital bed. "I'm going there now," he said, already running towards the door. "Mr. Sterling," Jack's voice stopped him. "There's a complication. The social worker in charge of the case is trying to transfer her to an orphanage as soon as she's discharged. According to the doctors, she has no known family or guardians." Richard closed his eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility descend on his shoulders. Luna had saved Ethan, and now she was alone in a hospital, about to be sent to an overcrowded orphanage. He couldn't let that happen. City General Hospital at 2 in the morning was a place of cold lights and corridors that echoed with the sound of hurried footsteps and machines that never stopped. Richard ran through the white hallways, following the signs to the pediatric ward, his heart beating so hard that he was sure others could hear it. When he finally found the room, he stopped at the door, trying to prepare himself for what he would see. Nothing could have prepared him for the reality. Luna was lying in a bed that seemed to swallow her, her body so small that it barely made a bulge under the white hospital sheets. Her face was pale and sweaty, her hair stuck to her forehead from the fever, and there were tubes connected to her tiny arm. But what squeezed Richard's heart the most was seeing that even sick and vulnerable, Luna kept her eyes alert, constantly scanning her surroundings. Even there, in a place that should represent safety and healing, she remained in a state of constant vigilance. Richard knocked gently on the door and entered slowly, trying not to make sudden movements that could scare her. When Luna saw him, her eyes widened, and she tried to sit up in bed, her body tense despite her weakness. "Hey, you don't have to be afraid," Richard said softly, keeping his distance. "Remember me, I'm Ethan's dad, the boy you gave your coat to." Luna didn't answer, but he saw recognition dawn in her eyes. He also saw something else, an expression he was beginning to understand. It was the same one she had shown that rainy night, the certainty that adults meant trouble. "How are you feeling?" Richard asked, pulling a chair close to the bed but not sitting down, maintaining a non-threatening posture. "Where's Ethan?" was the first thing Luna said, her voice hoarse from the fever, but clear. Even sick, her first concern wasn't for herself, but for the boy she had helped. Richard felt a lump in his throat. "He's fine. He's at home, sleeping. But he asks about you every day. He still has your coat, you know? Takes care of it like it's treasure." For a moment, something like relief passed over Luna's face, but it was quickly replaced by the usual distrust. "Why are you here?" she asked, her eyes never leaving his face. "Because I was worried about you. Because I wanted to make sure you were okay." Richard paused, carefully choosing his next words. "And because I want to help." The word help had the effect of a bomb. Luna shrank back against the pillow, her eyes narrowing. "I don't want help. I want to get out of here." "Luna!" Richard had found out her name through the hospital records. "You're sick. You need to stay here until you get better." "No!" The response came out louder than Luna intended, and she immediately glanced nervously at the door, as if expecting nurses to come running. "Hospitals are traps. They say they're going to take care of you, then they send you to worse places." Richard felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. What kind of experiences had this child had to develop so much fear of medical help? How many times had she been deceived by adults who promised protection? "I know you don't trust me," he said gently, "and I understand why. Probably a lot of people have promised you things they didn't keep." Luna didn't answer, but Richard saw that his words had hit the mark. She continued to watch him with those large, cautious eyes. "But I need you to know one thing," Richard continued. "That night, when you gave your coat to Ethan, you saved more than his life. You showed me what it really means to be generous. Ethan talks about you every day, you know. He says you have the most beautiful heart he's ever seen." For the first time since Richard had entered the room, he saw Luna's defenses falter slightly, her eyes filled with tears that she struggled not to shed. "Is he really okay?" she asked in a voice so low that Richard had to lean in to hear. "He's great. And you know what he asked me to do? He asked me to find you and invite you to come to our house to play with him. He said you must be missing your coat." Luna closed her eyes, and Richard saw a solitary tear run down her cheek. When she opened them again, there was a vulnerability there that made him want to protect her from all the evil in the world. "They're going to send me to an orphanage," she said simply, as if she were reporting the weather. "The nurse said." Richard felt the anger rise in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "Not if I can help it." 3 days later, when Luna was discharged from the hospital, Richard was waiting in the hospital hallway with a briefcase full of documents and a lawyer by his side. He had worked tirelessly, moving heaven and earth, using all his influence to prevent Luna from being sent to the orphanage. What he didn't expect was to encounter resistance from the very child he was trying to protect. "No," Luna said firmly when Richard explained that he wanted to become her temporary guardian. She was sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, wearing new clothes that a sympathetic nurse had gotten for her, but her eyes maintained the same fierce determination that Richard was learning to recognize. "I'm not going to your house." Mr. Davies, Richard's lawyer, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mr. Sterling, perhaps we should reconsider." "No," Richard interrupted, without taking his eyes off Luna. "She has the right to choose." He knelt in front of the girl, getting down to her eye level. "Luna, why don't you want to come with us? Ethan is eager to see you again." Luna bit her lower lip, an internal battle clearly taking place in her small mind. "Because you're going to get tired of me. Everyone always gets tired. And then they send me away, and it's worse than before." The words hit Richard like a shot to the chest. How many times had this child been rejected? How many promises had been broken for her to develop this devastating certainty that she would be abandoned? "What if I promised that that would never happen?" Richard asked softly. "Everyone promises that," Luna replied, her voice small but full of a bitter wisdom that no child should possess. It was then that something happened that would change everything. Ethan appeared in the doorway of the room, escaping from the nanny who was supposed to be watching him in the car. He carried Luna's threadbare coat, carefully folded in his small arms, as if it were made of the most precious fabric in the world. "Luna!" he shouted, running towards the bed. "You're better! I brought your coat back!" The effect was instantaneous. Luna's face lit up in a way that Richard had never seen, all the distrust and fear disappearing for a moment. She extended her arms, and Ethan practically jumped into them, the two hugging as if they were siblings who'd been separated for years. "I took good care of it," Ethan said seriously, offering the coat to Luna. "I didn't let anyone else use it." Luna took the coat reverently, hugging it against her chest. "Thank you," she murmured, and Richard saw tears glisten in her eyes. "Come home with me," Ethan asked with the devastating simplicity of childhood. "I have a lot of toys, and Maria makes the best mac and cheese in the world, and Daddy said you can have your own room with a bed all to yourself." Richard watched Luna process Ethan's words. He saw the exact moment when the barrier of distrust began to crack, not because of his adult words or formal promises, but because of the pure and innocent honesty of a child. "Your own room?" Luna asked hesitantly. "With your own window and everything," Ethan confirmed enthusiastically. "And then if you want to leave someday, Daddy will take you wherever you want. He promised me." Richard held his breath. Ethan had just made a promise in his name, but a promise that he was completely willing to honor. If Luna wanted to leave someday, he would respect her decision, no matter how much it might hurt him. Luna looked from Ethan to Richard, her eyes searching for signs of falsehood or manipulation. "Is it true?" she asked. "If I don't like it, can I leave?" "It's true," Richard confirmed, his voice firm despite the tightness in his throat. "You'll always have a choice, Luna, always." For a long moment, the room was silent, except for the sound of everyone's nervous breathing. Mr. Davies held the temporary guardianship documents, ready to be signed. The social worker watched from the door, clearly anxious to resolve the situation. Finally, Luna nodded almost imperceptibly. "So, are you coming?" Ethan asked, his face lighting up with hope. "I'm coming," Luna whispered, and Richard felt as if the whole world had changed with those two simple words. The Sterling mansion stood before Luna like a fairy tale castle, its windows gleaming in the golden light of the late afternoon. She held Ethan's hand tightly as they walked through the impeccably manicured garden, her bare feet sinking slightly into the soft grass. It was the first time in her life that she had stepped on something so green and soft. "It's very big," she murmured, looking up, trying to see where the house ended. "It is," Ethan agreed cheerfully, "but don't worry, I'll show you where everything is. And if you get lost, just yell my name and I'll find you." Richard watched the interaction of the two with a smile on his face, but Olivia waited for him at the front door with an expression that promised a storm. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, and her blue eyes flashed with barely suppressed irritation. "Richard, we need to talk," she said through gritted teeth, her forced smile directed only at Ethan and Luna. "Later," Richard replied firmly. "First, let's show Luna her room and let her settle in." The room that Richard had prepared for Luna was on the second floor, next to Ethan's room. It was decorated in soft shades of blue and white, with a small but comfortable bed, a bookshelf full of children's books, and a large window overlooking the garden. There were also new clothes hanging in the closet, all the right size. Luna stopped at the entrance, her eyes wide. "Is all this mine?" she asked in a voice so low that it could barely be heard. "All yours," Richard confirmed. "And if you want to change anything, you can talk to me." Luna approached the bed slowly, touching the mattress with hesitant fingers as if it could disappear at any moment. Then she went to the window, climbing onto a chair to look outside. The garden stretched as far as her eyes could see, and she could see other large houses in the distance. "Can I open the window whenever I want?" she asked, testing the latch. "Of course," Richard replied, realizing that for Luna, knowing that she had an escape route was fundamental to feeling safe. Ethan pulled Luna by the hand. "Come see my room. It's right here next door. And if you get scared at night, you can knock on the wall, and I'll hear you." While the children explored Ethan's room, Richard went downstairs to face Olivia. She was in the living room, pacing back and forth like a caged feline. "You've completely lost your mind," she said as soon as Richard appeared. "You brought a street child into our house, near our son. Do you have any idea what risks you're taking?" "What risks?" Richard asked, keeping his voice calm. "Luna is a 3-year-old who saved Ethan's life. She comes from the streets, Richard. She could have diseases. She could have learned violent behaviors. She could negatively influence Ethan. And what are people going to think? What are our friends going to say when they find out we're raising a what, Olivia?" Richard interrupted, his voice becoming dangerously low. "Finish the sentence." Olivia stopped pacing and glared at him. "A child who isn't ours, who comes from a world completely different from ours. Her world is different because people like us make it that way, because we close our eyes to the suffering that happens a few miles from our comfortable homes. Don't give me a social speech, Richard. We have responsibilities. Ethan needs to grow up in the right environment, with the right influences. We can't risk his future because of a momentary impulse of guilt." Olivia's words echoed through the house, and both didn't realize that Luna had stopped at the top of the stairs, listening to every word. Her small fists were clenched, and silent tears streamed down her face. She had understood perfectly. She wasn't welcome there. She was a risk, a problem, something that could harm Ethan. Ethan, who had come down behind her looking for a toy. He found Luna sitting on the last step of the stairs, crying silently. "Luna, why are you sad?" he asked, sitting next to her. "Your mum doesn't want me here," Luna said, trying to wipe away her tears with the back of her hand. "She thinks I'm going to hurt you." Ethan was quiet for a moment, processing the information with the seriousness that only children can demonstrate in the face of injustice. Then he made a decision that would surprise everyone. "Wait here," he said, getting up determinedly. Ethan went down the rest of the stairs and entered the room where his parents were still arguing. He interrupted the conversation by planting himself firmly between them, his chin raised with a determination that mirrored his father's. "Mom," he said with his child's voice, but loaded with an unusual firmness, "Luna saved my life. If you don't like her, then you don't like me either." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan's words echoed through the room like thunder on a clear day. Olivia looked at her small son as if he had transformed into a completely different person before her eyes. Richard felt pride and sadness at the same time. Pride for Ethan's moral courage. Sadness for seeing that a 2-year-old needed to take a stand that the adults around him couldn't resolve. "Ethan, honey, you don't understand," Olivia began, but Ethan shook his head vigorously. "Yes, I do," he said, his voice small but firm. "Luna was cold and gave me her coat. Now she's sad because you don't want her to live here. That's not right." Richard knelt next to his son, gently touching his small shoulders. "Ethan, how about you go play with Luna while Mom and Dad talk?" "No," Ethan replied, crossing his small arms. "I want you to stop fighting about Luna. She's already been sad too much in her life." The devastating simplicity of Ethan's observation hit both parents like a punch. A 2-year-old had understood something that 2 educated adults were failing to process, that Luna had already suffered enough. Olivia looked at Richard, then at Ethan, and something in her expression began to change. It wasn't acceptance, but at least it was the recognition that the situation was more complex than she had imagined. Where is she now?" Olivia asked, her voice losing some of its previous harshness. "On the stairs," Ethan replied, "crying because she heard you arguing." Richard felt as if he had been slapped. Luna had heard everything, all of Olivia's harsh words, all the discussions about whether she was welcome or not. He got up immediately and went to look for her, finding her exactly where Ethan had said, huddled on the last step of the stairs like an injured bird. "Luna," he said softly, sitting next to her, "I'm so sorry you heard our argument." Luna didn't look at him, keeping her eyes fixed on her own feet. "I know she doesn't want me here," she said in a voice so low that Richard had to lean in to hear. "Everyone always has a reason not to want me." The words cut Richard's heart like a razor. "Luna, look at me," he asked gently. When she finally raised her eyes, he saw all the pain of a lifetime of rejections reflected in those large, dark eyes. "I want you here. Ethan wants you here. And Olivia. She just needs time to understand." "But what if she never understands?" Luna asked. "What if she keeps thinking I'm dangerous for Ethan?" Richard hesitated because he couldn't promise something he wasn't sure he could deliver. "Then we're going to have to work together to show her who you really are." That night, after the children went to sleep, Richard and Olivia had the most difficult conversation of their marriage. Sitting on the porch, with the city sparkling below, they finally talked about things they had avoided for years. "When did we become like this?" Richard asked, looking at the stars. "When did we stray so far from our basic humanity?" Olivia was silent for a long time before answering. "I think it was gradual. We built walls to protect ourselves. And in the end, we ended up protecting ourselves from everything, including the possibility of doing good." Ethan saw Luna crying today, and his first instinct was to defend her. He's 2 years old, Olivia, 2 years old, and he already understands better than we do what compassion means. Olivia sighed deeply. "I'm scared, Richard, scared that she'll change us in ways I can't control, scared that Ethan will get hurt if she leaves, scared that we're entering something bigger than we can handle." "Maybe that's exactly what we need," Richard replied. "Maybe we need to be changed. Maybe we need to get out of our comfort zone and remember what really matters." In the room next door, Ethan had sneaked into Luna's room and found her sitting at the window, looking out at the moonlit garden. She was still wearing the new clothes, but the threadbare coat was carefully folded on the bed beside her. "Are you leaving?" Ethan asked, sitting down next to her at the window. "I don't know," Luna answered honestly. "Maybe it's better for everyone." "It wouldn't be better for me," Ethan said with the brutal honesty of childhood. "I like you here. You make me laugh, and you know stories that nobody else knows." Luna looked at Ethan, seeing in him the only good thing that had happened in her life in a long time. What kind of stories?" "How you learn to take care of hurt cats, how you know where to find food when you're hungry, how you're not afraid of the dark." Ethan paused, thinking, "You know important things that I don't know." For the first time since arriving at the mansion, Luna smiled for real. "You also know important things that I don't know." "Like what?" "Like what it's like to have a family that loves you, what it's like to have a place that's just yours, what it's like not to be afraid to sleep at night." The two sat at the window, sharing their different kinds of wisdom. Two small children trying to understand a world too complex for their age. A week had passed since Luna had arrived at the Sterling mansion, and a delicate routine was beginning to form. She woke up early, always before Ethan, and sat at the window watching the garden awaken with the sun. Richard had hired a private tutor, Ms. Evans, a kind lady who had experience with traumatized children, to help Luna with basic education. Luna was starting to relax, very slowly. She still slept with the threadbare coat next to her bed, still checked all the exits of any room she entered, still ate as if each meal might be her last. But Richard had noticed small changes. She laughed when Ethan told silly jokes. She had started to play with some toys, and the night before, for the first time, she had called Richard by his name instead of simply Sir. Olivia was making a genuine effort to accept Luna, although there was still tension. She watched from a distance the interactions between the children, and Richard noticed that sometimes she almost smiled when she saw Ethan and Luna playing together. They were small steps, but progress nonetheless. It was on a Thursday morning that everything began to unravel. Richard was in his office when Jack called with news that made his blood run cold. "Mr. Sterling, we have a problem. I learned through my contacts that social services is investigating Luna's situation. Someone made an anonymous complaint alleging that a street child was illegally removed from the system and is being kept in your home without proper authorization." "But I have temporary guardianship," Richard protested, feeling the panic begin to set in. "Yes, but the complaint alleges that there were irregularities in the process, that you used your influence to expedite procedures that should have taken months. And there's one more thing, sir. The complaint specifically mentions that the child may be in danger due to the emotional instability caused by abandonment trauma." Richard clenched his fists. "Who would make such a complaint?" "I'm still investigating, but I have a suspicion." The language used in the complaint is very specific, too technical to be from someone on the outside. It seems to have been made by someone who knows the legal system well. A terrible suspicion began to form in Richard's mind. "Jack, I need you to find out who made this complaint, and I need to know how much time we have before social services arrives here. From what I've been able to gather, they plan to make a surprise visit tomorrow morning. They'll want to assess Luna's living conditions and possibly remove her temporarily while they investigate the allegations." Richard hung up the phone with trembling hands. How was he going to explain to Luna that she might have to leave? How could he look in Ethan's eyes and say that the girl he considered a sister was being taken away again? But first, he needed to confirm his suspicion about who had made the complaint. He found Olivia in the living room, flipping through a decorating magazine with exaggerated concentration. There was something in her posture that alerted him. She was too tense, avoiding his gaze. "Olivia," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "We need to talk." She looked up from the magazine, and Richard saw guilt flash briefly across her face before she could mask it. "About what?" "About the complaint that was made against our guardianship of Luna." The magazine slipped from Olivia's hands, falling to the floor with a thud. She didn't try to pick it up. "Richard, it was you." It wasn't a question. Olivia stood up, walking to the window as if she needed physical distance to have this conversation. "I was protecting our family, protecting Ethan." "Protecting Ethan from what?" "From learning compassion, from having a sister who adores him, from seeing that there are people in the world who need help. Protecting him from getting attached to someone who will inevitably leave us." Olivia exploded, turning to face him. "Richard, can't you see? This girl comes from a world of trauma and abandonment. No matter how much we try to help her, sooner or later she's going to freak out, she's going to run away, or something is going to happen that will force her to leave. And when that happens, Ethan will be devastated. So, you decided to devastate him first. I decided to prevent him from getting hurt later." Richard looked at the woman he had been married to for 8 years and realized that he might never have really known her. "Olivia, you just condemned a 3-year-old child to go back to the system that has failed her entire life, out of fear that our son might get emotionally hurt in the future." "Our son," she emphasized. "That's the difference, Richard. Ethan is our son, she isn't." "She could be," Richard said quietly, "if you let her." At that moment, Ethan appeared in the entrance to the room, holding Luna's hand. The two children had obviously overheard part of the discussion, and Luna's face was pale with terror. "Dad," Ethan said, his voice small and confused, "why are you fighting again? And why is Luna crying?" Richard looked at Luna and saw that she had understood perfectly what was happening. Her eyes were filled with tears. but also with a devastating resignation, the same expression she had had that first night when he tried to help her. "They're going to take me away, aren't they?" Luna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The silence that followed Luna's question was broken only by the sound of Olivia sobbing softly. The reality of what she had done finally hit her when she saw the devastated face of the child she had condemned. Ethan let go of Luna's hand and ran to Richard, hugging his legs with desperate strength. "Dad, don't let them take Luna away," Ethan begged, his tears soaking his father's pants. "Please, Dad, she's my sister." Richard knelt and hugged Ethan, over his son's shoulder, seeing Luna standing in the entrance to the room like a marble statue. She had stopped crying, and her expression had become blank. The same protective mask she used when she needed to disconnect emotionally in order to survive. "Luna," Richard said gently, "come here." She shook her head slowly. "I need to pack my things," she said in a mechanical voice that broke Richard's heart. "It's always better to be ready when they come." "No," Richard said firmly, getting up with Ethan still in his arms. "No one is taking you anywhere. I promise." "You can't promise that," Luna replied with the bitter wisdom of someone who had been through this before. "Social workers always win. Adults always decide what's best for children, even when they don't know anything about them." Olivia had stopped crying and watched the interaction with growing horror, seeing the resignation in Luna's voice, the lack of hope in her eyes, made something stir in her chest, something that she had tried to bury under layers of privilege and self-preservation. "Richard," Olivia said in a broken voice, "what have I done?" "You protected our family," Richard replied coldly, "exactly as you wanted." That night, no one in the Sterling house could sleep. Richard spent hours on the phone with lawyers, trying to find a legal loophole that could prevent Luna's removal. Olivia remained locked in her office, calling contacts in the city government, desperately trying to undo what she had done. But it was too late. The bureaucratic machine had already been set in motion. Ethan refused to leave Luna's room. He had snuggled up next to her on the small bed, holding her hand while she stared blankly at the ceiling. She had put on the old, worn clothes she had worn when she arrived, leaving the new clothes carefully folded on the dresser. Why did you put on those clothes?" Ethan asked, touching Luna's thin, faded blouse. "Because these are my real clothes," she replied simply. "The others were borrowed. But Daddy said they were yours." "Your daddy is good," Luna said, turning to look at Ethan. "He tried to give me a family, but some people aren't meant to have families." "You are too meant to have a family," Ethan insisted with the vehemence of childhood. "You're meant to be my sister." Luna smiled sadly, the first expression of emotion she had shown since the afternoon. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, Ethan. But sometimes good things don't last." "This one will last," Ethan said, squeezing her hand. "I'll make it last." At 5 in the morning, Richard finally went upstairs to check on the children. He found Ethan sleeping next to Luna, who was awake, looking out the window at the garden she would soon leave behind. "Can't sleep?" Richard asked softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I can never sleep on the last night," Luna replied. "I learned that it's better to stay awake and enjoy it until the last minute." Richard felt tears burn his eyes. "Luna, this isn't the end. I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to use every resource I have. I'm going to move heaven and earth to bring you back." "Don't do that," Luna said, looking at him with eyes that seemed too old for a 3-year-old. "It'll just make Ethan sad for longer. It's better for him to forget about me quickly." "Ethan will never forget about you. I'll never forget about you." Luna studied Richard's face for a long moment. "You're different from the other adults," she said finally. "You really wanted to help me. But some people are too broken to be fixed." "You're not broken, Luna. You're the strongest person I've ever met." "Strong people don't cry," she replied, but Richard saw the tears welling up in her eyes. "Strong people cry when they need to," Richard said. "And you can cry with me. You can be angry. You can yell. You can blame me. You don't have to be strong all the time." It was then that Luna's defenses finally crumbled. 3 years of pain, abandonment, and trauma came out all at once. In sobs that shook her small body, Richard picked her up, being careful not to wake Ethan, and carried her to the armchair near the window, where he rocked her gently as she cried all the fears and hurt she had kept bottled up for so long. "I wanted to stay," she sobbed against his shoulder. "I wanted to have a real family." "You have a real family," Richard murmured, kissing the top of her head. "And we're going to find a way to stay together. I promise." Outside, the sun began to rise, bringing with it the day that would change everything again. At 9 in the morning, 3 official cars parked in the driveway of the Sterling mansion. Richard watched from the living room window as social workers, a child psychologist, and 2 police officers got out of the vehicles, their expressions professional and determined. He knew this moment would come, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of seeing strangers coming to take the child who had become so important to his family. Luna was sitting on the stairs, wearing her old clothes and holding the threadbare coat like a protective shield. Ethan was next to her, refusing to leave her side for a single second. Olivia was in the living room, pale as a ghost, finally understanding the magnitude of what she had set in motion. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," said Dr. Thompson, the head social worker, when Richard opened the door. "I'm in charge of the case of the minor Luna. We received a complaint about irregularities in the temporary guardianship, and we need to make an immediate assessment of the situation." "I understand," Richard replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Please, come in." The group entered the room, and Richard saw Luna shrink even further on the stairs. She knew this scene. She had lived versions of it several times. Official people showing up, whispered conversations, and then the inevitable departure to a new and unknown place. "Where is the child?" asked Dr. Thompson, consulting her papers. "There," Richard said, pointing to the stairs. "Ethan, come here, please." "No," Ethan said firmly, putting his arm protectively around Luna. "I'm not going to let you take my sister away." Dr. Green, the child psychologist, approached the children slowly, kneeling to get down to their eye level. "Hello, Luna. My name is Michael. I came here to talk to you." Luna didn't answer, only watched him with the large, cautious eyes that Richard had learned to recognize. "Are you happy here?" Dr. Green asked gently. The simple question seemed to break something inside Luna. She looked around the room, at Richard, who had become the first adult she had trusted, at Ethan, who loved her unconditionally, at Olivia, who was crying silently on the sofa. "Yes," she said in a voice so low that Dr. Green had to lean in to hear. "Very happy." "And do you feel safe here?" Luna nodded, squeezing Ethan's hand. Dr. Thompson consulted her papers again. "According to the complaint we received, there are allegations that the guardianship process was expedited irregularly, and that the child may be suffering emotional instability due to the unsuitable environment." It was then that Olivia rose from the sofa, surprising everyone. "I made the complaint," she said, her voice clear despite the tears. "And I was wrong." The silence in the room was total. Dr. Green stopped writing in his notes. Dr. Thompson looked up from her papers, and Richard looked at his wife with a mixture of shock and hope. "Mrs. Sterling," said Dr. Thompson, "are you saying that you made a false complaint?" "No," Olivia replied, walking to where Luna and Ethan were sitting. "I made a complaint based on fear, not on facts. Fear that my son would get hurt, fear of changes in our life, fear that I wouldn't know how to deal with a traumatized child." Olivia knelt in front of Luna, her eyes filled with tears. "Luna, I'm sorry. I was trying to protect my family, but I didn't realize that you were already part of it." Luna watched her carefully, looking for signs of falsehood or manipulation, but all she saw was genuine regret and pain. "Dr. Thompson," Olivia continued, turning to the social worker, "my husband followed all the legal procedures for temporary guardianship. Luna is receiving proper medical care, education, and more importantly, love. She isn't being harmed, she's being healed. Even so, said Dr. Thompson, that we need to follow protocol. The child will have to come with us while we conduct a thorough investigation. No! Shouted Ethan, hugging Luna tightly. You can't take her! She's my sister! Luna gently untangled herself from Ethan's embrace and stood up. Richard saw the resignation in her eyes, the same expression she had had that first night when she tried to run away. It's okay, Ethan, she said softly. I'll be okay. But when she took the first step towards Dr. Thompson, something extraordinary happened. Ethan stepped in front of her, his small arms outstretched as if he could protect her physically. If you take Luna, Ethan said with the fierce determination of childhood, then I'm going to have to go with her, because families stay together. Richard felt his heart break and swell with pride at the same time. His 2-year-old son had just defined what it meant to be family better than any adult in the room. It was then that Dr. Thompson did something unexpected. She put away her papers and knelt in front of the 2 children. Ethan, she said gently, do you really love Luna like a sister? More than anything in the world, Ethan replied without hesitation. Dr. Thompson looked at Luna. And you, Luna, do you want to stay here with this family? Luna looked around one more time, at Richard, who had risked everything to protect her, at Ethan, who was willing to go with her anywhere, at Olivia, who had recognized her mistake and apologized. Yes, she said, her voice growing in strength, I want to stay with my family. Luna's words echoed through the room with a force that surprised even her. For the first time in her life, she had openly declared that she wanted to belong somewhere, that she wanted to be part of a family. The courage needed to pronounce those words had come from a place deep inside her, a place that she thought she had lost forever. Dr. Thompson observed the scene with experienced eyes. In 20 years of working with children in vulnerable situations, she had developed a keen instinct for distinguishing between genuine protection situations and problematic cases. What she saw before her was an imperfect but real family trying to form around a child who desperately needed love. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, she said finally, I'm going to be frank with you. The complaint we received raised red flags in our department. Expedited procedures usually indicate irregularities. But Richard held his breath. Ethan squeezed Luna's hand, and Olivia closed her eyes as if she were praying. But, Dr. Thompson continued, I also know how to recognize when a child is truly safe and loved. Luna, can you tell me what your life has been like here? Luna hesitated for a moment, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she had never been invited to express her feelings about her own life. Richard gave me a room of my own, she said slowly, with a window that I can open whenever I want, and Ethan plays with me every day and teaches me things I didn't know. And Olivia, she looked at Olivia, who was waiting tensely. Olivia said sorry when she did something wrong. Nobody has ever said sorry to me before. Dr. Green had been watching the interactions in silence, taking notes on body language, attachment patterns, signs of trauma and recovery. Dr. Thompson, he said discreetly, can I speak with you in private? They stepped away to a corner of the room, whispering to each other while Richard, Olivia and the children waited anxiously. Ethan wouldn't let go of Luna's hand, as if he could physically anchor her to that moment. You know what's funny? Luna whispered to Ethan. What? I always thought families were for special people, people who were born right, in the right place. I never thought someone like me could have one. You are special, Ethan said, with the absolute conviction of childhood. You're the most special person I've ever met. Olivia, overhearing the conversation, felt fresh tears streaming down her face. How had she been so blind? How hadn't she realized that Luna wasn't a threat to her family, but a precious addition that would make it stronger? Dr. Thompson and Dr. Green returned, their expressions softer. After our preliminary assessment, said Dr. Thompson, we've determined that Luna is in a stable and loving environment. However, We will require monthly follow-up visits for the next 6 months to ensure that the adaptation process continues to be positive. Richard felt as if he could breathe again for the first time in days. That means Luna can stay, confirmed Dr. Thompson. But it also means that you will have to work together to formalize the permanent adoption. It will be a long process, requiring psychological evaluations, regular home visits, and a lot of dialogue. We'll do whatever it takes, Richard said immediately. We all will, added Olivia, her voice firm despite the tears. We're a family. After the officials left, the house was strangely silent. It was as if everyone was processing what had just happened. Luna was still wearing her old clothes, but now they seemed like a disguise that she was ready to abandon. Luna, Olivia said hesitantly, would you like to help me pick out some new clothes? Clothes that are really yours, not borrowed? Luna studied Olivia's face carefully. You really want me to stay? I want you to be my daughter, Olivia replied, the words coming out more easily than she expected. If you'll let me be your mom. The word mom hung in the air between them. Luna had never had a mother, at least not one she remembered. The idea was both terrifying and wonderful. And I don't know how to be a daughter, Luna said honestly. I don't know how to be the mom of a brave daughter like you, Olivia replied. But we can learn together. Ethan, who had observed the entire conversation with the seriousness of a diplomat, finally smiled. Does that mean we're a real family now? Richard knelt and opened his arms, and for the first time, all 4 people embraced together, an imperfect, wounded, but real family. Luna allowed herself to relax completely in the embrace, feeling for the first time in her life that she was exactly where she should be. We're a real family, confirmed Richard, kissing the top of Luna's head. Forever. Luna closed her eyes and finally believed that maybe, just maybe, forever was possible for someone like her. 6 weeks had passed since that rainy night that had changed everything. Autumn was giving way to winter, and the first snow of the year began to fall gently on the city. Luna was at the window of her room, her real room now, watching the flakes dance in the air like small, white miracles. She was wearing a new blue dress, chosen by herself during a shopping trip with Olivia the week before, but the threadbare coat remained carefully folded in her dresser drawer, kept like a treasure, not because she needed it to keep warm, but because it represented the journey that had brought her there. Luna! Ethan called from the hallway. Come see! Mom and Dad have a surprise! Mom. The word still sounded strange to Luna's ears, but now it was a good strangeness, like new shoes that would soon become comfortable. Olivia had transformed in recent months, revealing a capacity for maternal love that not even she knew she possessed. On nights when she woke up from nightmares, it was Olivia who ran to comfort her. When she learned to read her first full word, it was Olivia's eyes that filled with tears of pride. Luna went downstairs and found Richard, Olivia, and Ethan gathered in the living room, all with mysterious smiles. On the coffee table was a large, official envelope. What is this? Luna asked, her curiosity winning out over her usual caution. Open it and see, Richard said, his eyes shining with emotion. With slightly trembling fingers, Luna opened the envelope and removed an official document. Her reading skills were still limited, but she was able to distinguish some important words. Birth certificate, Luna Sterling, daughter of Richard Sterling and Olivia Sterling. That means, she began, her voice faltering. That means you're officially our daughter, Olivia said, kneeling next to her, forever and ever, no matter what. Luna looked at the document, then at each member of her new family. 6 weeks ago, she was a nameless girl living in the shadows of the city. Now she had a last name, a family, a place in the world. And there's more, said Ethan, barely able to contain his excitement. Tell her, Dad. Richard smiled. Remember that awning where we met, that abandoned store? Luna nodded, curious. Well, I bought it, and we're turning it into a drop-in center for homeless kids. A place where they can go to warm up, eat, and more importantly, where they can find people willing to help them build a better future. And do you know what we're going to call it? Asked Olivia, her eyes sparkling. What? Luna's Hope Center, Ethan said triumphantly. Because of you. Luna felt tears of happiness streaming down her face. The place where her life had changed would now help change the lives of other children who, like her, desperately needed a second chance. Can I help? She asked. I want to help other children find families too. Of course you can, Richard said, hugging her. Who better to show them that it's possible? That afternoon, the Sterling family went to visit the site that would become Luna's Hope Center. The awning was still there, now protected by scaffolding and construction materials. Luna gently touched the wall where she had sheltered that fateful night. But this is where it all started, she said softly. No, Richard corrected, placing his hand on her shoulder. This is where it all came full circle. It all started when you decided to give your coat to Ethan. That was the moment our family was really born. Ethan, now wearing a new coat but carrying a small backpack where he kept important things, pulled out something special. It was a photo they had taken the week before, the four of them together in the garden of the mansion, smiling as if they were the happiest people in the world. I'm going to leave this picture here, Ethan said, placing it carefully in a protected corner of the awning, so that other kids can see that dreams can come true. As they walked back to the car, Luna held Richard and Olivia's hands, with Ethan skipping happily alongside. The snow continued to fall, but now she saw it as a blessing, not as just another obstacle to survive. Thank you, Luna said suddenly, stopping in the middle of the sidewalk. For what? Asked Olivia. For teaching me that trusting can be dangerous, but that not trusting is an even worse prison. For showing me that families aren't just people who share the same blood, but people who choose to love each other every day. Richard felt a lump in his throat. Thank you for teaching us what generosity really means, for showing us that the simplest gestures can have the most profound consequences. When they got home, Luna ran to her room and took the threadbare coat from the drawer. For a moment, she hugged it against her chest, remembering all the cold nights she had spent, all the fears she had faced, all the journey that had brought her there. Then, carefully, she folded it and put it back in the drawer. Not because she didn't need it anymore, but because now it represented not only survival, but the moment when she learned that loving someone meant being willing to give everything for them. That night, for the first time since arriving at the mansion, Luna slept without checking the exits of the room, without keeping a packed backpack under her bed, without the constant fear that everything could end at any moment. She slept like a child who had finally found her place in the world, protected, loved, and more importantly, free to dream about a future that now belonged to her. The awning where it all began would soon become Luna's Hope Center, a place where other coats would be shared, other families would form, and other stories of love and redemption would begin. Because Luna had learned that true wealth wasn't in accumulating possessions, but in using our resources, whether they were big or small, to warm the hearts of those who most need our protection. And the coat that she once gave to protect a stranger had become the symbol of a family built not by blood, but by the daily choice to protect and love one another, even when it meant facing the cold together.